Hey everybody, blessings. Welcome to the channel. I am Dane, your host. I hope you're doing well wherever you may find yourselves. Do you ever find yourselves questioning whether there are too many subgenres within the category of rock and roll? And having said that, when it comes to a particular subgenre that is heavy metal or metal, are there too many subgenres within that subgenre, so to speak? And that also begs the question, has heavy metal or metal evolved to the point where we should separate metal from rock altogether? So this is something I'm going to talk about today. But let's start with a quote from Shakespeare. This is from the play Hamlet to tie it all together, and specifically from the play Hamlet, the character Polonius, when he's introducing the performers coming in to perform for the king and queen and everybody, he says, "These are the best actors in the world, right? Either for tragedy, comedy, history, pastoral, pastoral comical, historical pastoral, tragical historical, tragical comical historical, pastoral, scene individable, or poem unlimited. Seneca cannot be too heavy, nor Plautus too light, for the law of writ and the liberty. These are the only men," right? So now, there were only 6 or 7 or 8 subcategories of tragedy right there, or rather plays, I should say. We could add some more, right? But it still gives a taste of how funny it is, or ludicrous, or comical. It's not laughable, but you could make the argument that maybe it's a bit ridiculous that we have all these categories. Maybe not. Maybe you'll see at the end of the video how I really feel. I don't want to give that away, but I'm kind of still on the fence, playing both sides. On one hand, I get the argument that all these subcategories are necessary, and then on the other side, I say maybe hold off a minute, maybe not so much, because it gets out of hand, like the way Polonius goes in the play. So let me start by listing. And keep in mind, this is a long list, but it's still the tip of the iceberg when it comes to rock music or metal. So let's go ahead and get started. Here is a list alphabetically of many subgenres of rock or metal, rock and metal. Alternative metal. I'm not going to read all the examples of bands that fit each category, but you'll see what I mean. Alternative metal, System of a Down, Deftones. Atmospheric black metal, Wolves in the Throne Room, and Agalic, if I'm pronouncing that right. Avant-garde death metal, Gorguts and Portal. Avant-garde metal. You're going to see something interesting here, or maybe it's part of that ludicrous or ridiculousness, the repetition of metal or core or death or grind in the subcategory, right? So avant-garde metal, beat-down hardcore, black gaze, black metal, brutal death metal, Celtic metal, cyber grind, cyber metal, crossover thrash, think DRI, crust punk, D-beat, dark metal. Catatonia is listed as dark metal. I've heard them before. I have a couple other CDs. Not my cup of tea. I'm going to sell them at some point or give them away. But sounds like death metal to me. So that's kind of there's a lot of blurring between subgenres. So it's, not everything's black and white. So hence the questioning, do we really need all these subgenres? Deathcore, death doom, death grind, death metal, gent, the D is silent. Drone metal, think Sono, right? I like them. Doom metal, epic metal, Manowar is what's listed here. Experimental metal. I think Dillinger Escape Plan is considered that. Mr. Bungle. Folk metal, glam metal, or hair metal. Gothic metal, grindcore, groove metal, Doom. Pantera. Down is what I meant, not Doom. So groove metal, hardcore or hardcore punk, industrial black metal, industrial metal, kawaii metal or kawaii metal, think baby metal, Krishna core, adding spirituality of Hinduism and Buddhism, I believe, math metal, mathcore, melodic death metal, melodic hardcore, metalcore, metallic hardcore, New Deutsch Hart, which means new German hardness, new metal, Nintendo core, yes, that's a thing, Nintendo core, look that up, occult metal, old school death metal, pagan metal, pirate metal, post-hardcore, post-metal, think Neuroses, Isis, Cult of Luna, power metal, power violence, progressive death metal, progressive metal, punk rock, or just punk, right? Punk metal, think punk metal, think Venom, Motorhead is what some people list there. Rapcore, screamo, slam death metal, sludge metal, think I Hate God, Crowbar, speed metal, stoner metal, symphonic black metal, symphonic metal, technical death metal, technical thrash metal, Viking metal. Don't forget new wave of British heavy metal and new wave of traditional heavy metal, which that last one is a new thing. There are others, of course, again, tip of the iceberg, but that covers a lot of the, I don't want to say basic, but the most common ones are well known. So now let me pull up an article and talk about why I'm on the fence with respect to doing all these subgenres. Again, I'm going to make my point towards the end of the video. So this is from Metal Stuff. It's stuff about metal. It's metalstuff.net is the website. And this person argues that these subgenres are necessary. Why in the metal community is any argument against subgenres treated as valid? So he's arguing that it's important that you have all these different categories. If it's all just metal, then you're implying that Cannibal Corpse and Iron Maiden shouldn't be differentiated. I agree with that statement. Two different types of metal. After all, they're just metal, right? Let's all just band together and celebrate the imaginary brotherhood of steel. Five Finger Death Punch and Behemoth, just metal, Black Sabbath and Meshuggah, they're all the same, it's just metal, it's all just metal. Of course, he's being sarcastic, he doesn't agree with that. Then he says, technically it's true. I'm not going to read all this, but I'm going to pull out some major points here. Technically, and show you where his logic goes wrong. He's right in some places and wrong in the others. In my opinion, he's valid in some areas and invalid in others. I don't like saying wrong or right here because it's an opinion. But I'll show you his logic what's wrong is his logic is incorrect in a small place, kind of, you'll see. So technically he says this is true, but only in the same way that the Harry Potter series and the Encyclopedia Britannica are just books. All right, so there's his problem. He's going to the generality here. He's saying that, arguing that Harry Potter and the Encyclopedia Britannica are just books. What he should be doing is not going all the way back to the generalist or broadest of terms. Instead, he should talk about metal or rock or punk or the major subcategories right underneath rock. So you have rock, then you have metal, punk, hard rock, progressive rock, that kind of thing. And then the subcategories, so there's different, pyramids or hierarchies of things. So he's going way too general. So he says, and of course, this is that logical fallacy, the absurdity fallacy. I forget the Latin term, but he says, or how Love Actually and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre are just movies. See, again, he's using movies as the broadest term and then saying that you got a horror movie and a romantic comedy or a romantic film or romantic drama. I've never seen Love Actually, I don't think. Anyway, so his argument would be much more sound if he came down within books or within movies and went to a specific subgenre, you see, like horror, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then romantic comedy, because not all romantic comedies or romantic dramas are the same, just like not all horror movies are the same. You have the slasher film, then you have sci-fi horror, then you have, fill in the blank. There's all kind of different types. So that's where he's wrong or incorrect in his logic, because he's using this reductio absurdio, I think is the logical fallacy. So he says that This is what people who hate subgenres sound like to anybody who likes to talk about heavy metal with precision and clarity. But see, here's where he's incorrect as well, because people don't go back. So his flaw is like saying, so essentially what I'm saying is that his analogy fails. Because that would be like saying, so he uses books and he uses movies, and saying that would be like saying all movies and all books are the same. We know that they're not. Okay. Just like we know that all music is not the same. You have country, you have rap, you have this, you have that, right? So no one is saying we should just all label it music and let it be at that. No, you have your primary subgenres and then you have your tertiary and whatever. So that's the failed logic. No one again is saying we should just label things music and be done with that. He goes on to say from there, books are meticulously categorized into subgenres. Okay. So then why argue that it's like just give music or just give books or just give movies? So his logic is flawed. Now, again, here's part of his flawed argument. Yet in all my years of watching movies, I have never been presented with the argument, why can't we just call them all movies? Well, no one's saying that. He says, I'm sick of the genreification of movies. It only gives elitist assholes a way to put down other people's tastes. So let me repeat that. Yet in all my years of, because I forgot the quote, yet in all my years of watching movies, I have never been presented with the argument, quote, someone else saying, why can't we just call them all movies? I'm sick of the subgenreification of movies. It only gives elitists a way to put down other people's tastes. While technically true, a person who says this shows an incredible ignorance of the span and scope of movies. Well, see, that's the thing. No one that I know ever goes off and says, why can't we just call them just movies? No one says that. No one is saying subgenres aren't important. We're saying there are too many subgenres or too many subgenres within a particular subgenre. Okay, so I think I've spelled out the flaw in his analogy. Now, he has some important points that I agree with, but his analogy fails, is the overall thing that I'm presenting here. That logic, that analogy. There was a time when all heavy metal music was just called metal. He adds on, at that point, there wasn't enough variation in the genre to warrant the creation of subgenres. I agree. As I said, maybe metal's evolved to the point where we disconnect it from rock. Maybe. Let's take British Steel from Judas Priest as an example. Living After Midnight Breaking the Law is not a heavy metal song, nor is Living After Midnight. Maybe at one time Breaking the Law was, but Living After Midnight never was. That's just a party song. Martin Popoff is going on record and saying that British Steel is a Kiss record. Well, it's not. That one song sounds like it could be a Kiss song. But there's some metal on that album. Rapid Fire and Metal Gods are especially Rapid Fire. Those two songs are probably the heaviest songs on that album. Killing Machine or Hellbent for Leather is more hard rock than it is metal. It has some blues in it as well. There's some ballads. So anyway, let's see. A lot of people still consider metal part of the hard rock category. Whoa, there's subgenres of rock music like hard rock, psychedelic rock, soft rock, mainstream rock, pop rock. He goes on. Okay. And then he's still quoting people. No way, it's all just rock. We need to stop with the labeling as subgenreification of rock and roll music. Well, again, I'm not saying we should dispense with the subgenres. But again, I'm questioning, has it gone too far? He goes on to say that the new wave of British heavy metal introduced the concept of subgenres to the metal community. It was new, it was fresh, it was different. The problem with that argument is that the new wave of British heavy metal is a wave, it's a movement, it's not a genre, because there's just too many different styles within that. So again, this is another invalid point that he has. He says it was harder, faster, and more technically proficient than the other styles of metal. Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath sound very different, and to be able to discuss these differences, you need to have a label that reflects these differences. I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. He goes on to say, now the only argument against subgenres that carries any weight with me comes from metal artists themselves. Let's see. Well, I'll just read it. A good friend and coworker of mine who went to college for music theory usually presents the argument that being labeled as a musician is limiting. Incredibly good argument. I only have a couple real arguments to counter this. First, that if a label is limiting, constricting, it is inaccurate or incomplete. Secondly, that there's a difference between labeling and describing. Genre labels are essentially words that we use to describe different styles and influences. Okay. Don't have a problem with that. Subgenreification is an example of a manifestation of what is referred to as, quote, subcultural space. This means it is a social area reserved specifically for that subculture. This includes terms that mean absolutely nothing to people outside of that culture. I'm going to disagree with that because it seems to alienate people and suggest that you're not welcome here. Well, people might want to try something new. I may be misunderstanding what he's saying here. Have you ever had a friend who doesn't listen to metal ask you the difference between certain genres, and then when you start to explain it, their eyes gloss over, and at best they pretend to listen in the interest of politeness? This is exactly what I'm talking about. They don't participate in the subculture. Well, that's because that's why they asked. They're interested. Okay. If someone says, what's the difference between, maybe that's a way of wanting to be invited in. I could be wrong. If you go on to say, well, this band is very heavy, still reading his article, very few people would have any idea what I'm really talking about. There are as many different definitions of heavy and metal as there are fans of metal. Okay. Now, if we talked about Viking metal for a minute, it's Viking themed. If you talk about Amon Amarth, you're dealing with Thor and Odin and Ragnarok and Loki and so many of the cultural things that go with Viking. But if you talk about Yngwie Malmsteen, because he's Swedish and marching out has the song "I'm a Viking," that's a Viking metal song. So again, there's going to be some blurring. So the problem with a lot of subgenres is there's going to be some blurring, or you have an album that's uneven and has different metal styles on it. If you talk about a band like Neuroses, who started off as a punk band and then worked their way to becoming totally different. Again, they're listed as post-metal, and I have a big problem with post-punk and post-metal or post-anything, or the word wave, because or grind or core, or just so many of these titles, because it's back to Polonius, right? So if we take metallic hardcore and pagan metal and pirate metal and post-metal and power violence, well, we can have a band that's, I'm going to screw this up, but I'm just going to combine some names, even if I don't read the same ones I just read. But we could have a band that's metallic hardcore, German hardness, Nintendo core, occult, pagan, pirate, post-hardcore, power metal. See, that's that absurdity. So if you tell someone, hey, this band is metal, they're going to understand that it has a certain heaviness to it. There may be blast beats, there may not. There may be harsh vocals, there may not be. But you can have your cake and eat it too, maybe. So again, this notion of all these different categories. Let me continue to read some of the to see where he goes and get the idea of what he's trying to say here. He says that the use of such genres is infinitely more accurate, and with the sheer amount of heavy metal available, labels like this help people find what they like in the same way the Dewey Decimal System helps library. Okay, I can buy into that. Are there people who will use this system to act like an asshole? Of course, but that's not exclusive to heavy metal. There are plenty of literary snobs and movie critics, and they all have their own preferred genres and styles of writing and directing. Well, I have to stop there because, again, his analogy goes off the rails here. Because when it comes to movies, while there are a lot of subgenres, they pale in comparison to the number of subgenres in rock and metal. So, for example, I taught film as literature or film in general at the high school level many years, 6 or 7, and you have, of course, tragedy, comedy, drama, thriller, suspense. Some of these blur also, action, comedy, action comedy. See me being Polonius again. You have war movies, and then I talk about this when I do my film class every once in a while when it comes around again. I argue that the submarine war movie is a subgenre of the war film, where the location of the film is mostly in the submarine, like Das Boot, Crimson Tide, that sort of thing. But you can get carried away is the point that I'm making here. So you have the Western, right? You have all kind of different categories within the movies. And yes, critics have their particular, you have the film noir, which is one of my favorite. But all these different subgenres, especially within the metal community alone, because most of these I read are metal, right? Seems daunting and intimidating. And imagine if we still had record stores or CD stores, and we do, but not to the effect that we used to have. Most of us would put all these under the metal section. We wouldn't put under rock anymore because there's too many. But there was a time when you did. You may have a small heavy metal section, then that started to grow, and that sort of thing. You would put the sludge metal with the doom, with the stoner, with the jazz metal. There's one I didn't mention, right? That's a thing. Band called The Shining, or Shining. Anyway, so there's a lot more here than I mentioned. So I invite you to go online and go type in metalstuff.net and read this article. If you hate stereotypes, then stop stereotyping elitists. And that's how he ends his article. So there's some good points that he makes. So I'm going to argue, like him, that subgenres are necessary, definitely. Like movies, you need your action, your drama, your comedy, your tragicomedy, right? Your action thriller, your action thriller suspense. There's right? Those are kind of the same thing. Your horror comedy, that's a real thing. April Fool's Day, back from the late 80s, I believe, or mid 80s. That was a funny horror movie, which plays with stereotypes of the horror movie or archetypes, that kind of thing. So essentially, let me turn back to the front here. My notes, got a little bit of notes here. Can go the route of Polonius and like I do and think how ridiculous is it. Again, I could combine like Celtic metal. Okay, you have heavy metal, but it's very pastoral and folky, or folk metal, right? You could argue that Celtic metal and folk metal are one and the same. They're very similar. They're not exactly the same. You could lump in stoner and doom together. You could lump in dark metal with death metal. They're not that far off, right? So there's a lot of even drone metal is very doom metal like, right? So again, I'm not saying take these labels away. I'm saying that the propensity is going to be that this gets worse, because if you have all these subgenres, then take brutal death metal as an example, which I'm not familiar with, not that much anyway. That could branch off into 16 different types of brutal death metal. And then cyber metal, whatever that is, can branch off into 30 different types of... So then you have an infinite... And then we get lost in the shuffle, and then it gets crazy. And then you're Polonius exponentially to the absurdist degree. So as I said at the beginning of the video, I'm on the fence about this, but I'm leaning towards putting a stop to going any further with these subgenres, because so if we go back to rock, I'm going to tackle rock and metal and separate them. Should we do that in a minute? So this is kind of a long video. But if we go back to rock, right, the subgenres of that are metal, or rather hard rock, AOR, right, yacht rock, soft rock, heavy metal, okay, progressive rock, okay, and there are folk rock, pop, and we'll stop there. There are others, but you get the point. And then within metal by itself, you have all the things I just read, which is, astoundingly like, oh my God, this is a hot mess, right? There's that movie, The Odd Couple, right, where one of them throws the plate of linguine against the wall. He goes, "That was my supper. That was my spaghetti. It's linguine. Now it's a mess," says Oscar or the other character. It's been years since I saw that. Not the TV show, the movie, Walter Matthau. So it is a hot mess, or it's a mess. Now it's a mess, right? So should we disengage metal from rock? I'm not sure. I can't lie. I'm going to be honest. I would say it's really difficult at times to separate hard rock from heavy metal. I would say hard rock stays under rock. Heavy metal, I could do a separate video. All of us rock channels on YouTube could do a video. I don't know if anyone's done it. I'm thinking about doing the notion of, was this album ever really heavy metal? Looking at, say, British Steel, right? That kind of thing. Has metal evolved? Absolutely, because of this hot mess. What was metal back in the 80s fails, you could argue, to be considered metal by today's standards because of all the heaviness that's going on. But then you get someone like Lemmy of Motorhead who says, we're not heavy metal, we're just a rock band. And Motorhead was the band that united the punks and the heavy metal guys, right, and gals. And that's one of the beauties of Motorhead, that you got both the punks loving Motorhead and the rock fanatics and the heavy metal fanatics loving, and the hard rock fanatics loving Motorhead. Maybe Lemmy's onto something here. We put them in the heavy metal category. Venom is considered new wave of British heavy metal or black metal, or the beginnings of death metal and stuff, but they're very punk in the same. They have, if you take the distortion off the pedals that Cronus and Abaddon are playing, or Mantis is the drummer, right? It sounds like surf music. Someone did a video on that. It sounds like, Dick Dale, right? So kind of. So just keep that in mind. So if you put the proverbial to my head, or Damocles' sword above me, I would say it's time to disconnect metal from rock. At, say, where... Maybe not. See how tough this is? I guess the compromise would be whatever the starting date, I'd have to do the research, whatever the starting date of extreme metal, new metal, and death metal began, that is perhaps where maybe the compromise would be, once you get these extreme types of metal, the catatonias, the ISIS, the neuroses, etc., maybe that's where you say, okay, now this is no longer rock music. And I could be wrong. I'm just. This is a talking out loud kind of video. This is really where your comments will be appreciated. There's a certain necessity in not coming fully scripted, as I usually am, and I did that on purpose because I kind of want to think things through as I talk. So essentially, here's the compromise, sort of. I agree that subgenres are necessary, but it can get so ludicrous. Does that State Farm commercial where Ludacris pops up like a genie And he goes, you don't tell ludicrous what's ludicrous. Ludicrous tells you what's ludicrous, right? But in all seriousness, it can get out of hand. As I said, it can get ludicrous with all the different... When is it going to end with all these 50 years from now, this will be exponentially worse than it is now. And then years from there, it'll be, but overall, think of the following two things. Number one, think of Billy Joel's lyrics from the 70s. Hot funk, cool punk, even if it's old junk. It's still rock and roll to me. Next phase, new wave, dance craze, anyways. It's still rock and roll to me. Everybody's talking about the new sound, funny, but it's still rock and roll to me. Or you could say, if you're let's say tomorrow you hear a new band and they're death, grindcore, speed thrash, new wave, traditional heavy metal, punk band, right? Is it Polonius again? You can quote Billy Joel again and say, everybody's talking about the new sound, funny, but it's still rock and roll to me, or it's still metal to me. Finally, number two, regardless of whether you think subgenres are a good thing or they're a bad thing, it's just the music that matters most, isn't it? Thanks for watching. Take care.